Is that dirt under her fingernails? Cassandra Sullivan didn't whisper it. She wanted Emily to hear. The entire table went still, 12 members of the most powerful family in the state, all turning at once to look at the woman Ryan had brought home. The woman in the borrowed dress. The woman who smelled faintly of coffee and dish soap, and something none of them could name. Emily Harper didn't look down, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. She looked straight at Cassandra Sullivan and said very quietly, "That depends. Are we talking about your family's hands or mine?" Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. And Margaret Sullivan at the head of the table set down her crystal glass with a sound like a gunshot. If your heart just stopped, good. Subscribe right now, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Emily's story travels. Let's go back to where this all began. The morning Emily Harper decided to walk into the Sullivan estate, she told herself one thing. Don't apologize for existing. She'd been telling herself that for 34 years, in the school hallway when her shoes had a hole, at the bank when they denied her mother's loan the second time, at every table she'd ever waited on where someone snapped their fingers at her like she was furniture. She was good at not apologizing. She'd had a lot of practice. What she was not good at, what she had never been good at, was pretending she didn't care when she did. And God help her, she cared about Ryan Sullivan. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. He'd walked into Maplewood Diner on a Tuesday in October. Wrong season, wrong shoes for the weather. Right instinct to sit at the counter instead of a booth. Emily had noticed the shoes first. Italian leather, the kind that didn't belong anywhere near a laminate countertop. Then she'd noticed his hands, the way they wrapped around the coffee mug. She slid to him, careful, like the warmth was something he actually needed, not just expected. He'd ordered the turkey melt. "Don't," she said. He blinked. "Excuse me." "The turkey melt, don't." She leaned one hand on the counter. "You look like a man who makes decisions for a living. The turkey melt is not a decision. It's a surrender." He stared at her. Then slowly the corner of his mouth moved. "What would you recommend?" "The short rib hash. It's not on the menu anymore, but Danny still makes it for people who ask correctly." "How do I ask correctly?" "You just did." He laughed. Really laughed, not the polished boardroom version Emily would later learn he deployed at events, but the unguarded kind, the kind that came from somewhere lower and more honest. That was the first morning. There were 263 more after it. By the 4th month, Ryan Sullivan was a regular. By the 6th, Carla, who had worked the diner since before Emily, who noticed everything and kept score, had pulled Emily into the walk-in cooler between lunch and dinner, and said with the gravity of a woman delivering a diagnosis, "He's in love with you." "He tips well," Emily said. Emily. "He comes in a lot, Carla, that doesn't mean. He memorized your schedule." Carla counted on her fingers. "He rerouted his morning commute to come here instead of the Starbucks, 3 blocks from his office. He brought you a book last Thursday, a specific book, not a random one. One you mentioned in passing 4 weeks ago that you said you wanted to read. He wrote down something you said in passing 4 weeks ago and then found the book." She stopped. "Emily, what part of that is just a good tipper?" Emily didn't answer. Because the truth was, she'd noticed all of it, every single detail. She just hadn't let herself name it yet because naming things made them real, and real things could be lost, and she had lost enough. When Ryan first asked her to come to the estate, not a date he'd clarified quickly, not a formal thing, just meet my family. I want them to know you. She'd been quiet for long enough that he'd started to take it back. "You don't have to," he said. I know this isn't." "I'll come," she said. He stopped. "Yeah, yes." She looked at him directly the way she always did without decoration. "But I need you to understand something first. I'm not going to perform for them, Ryan. I'm not going to dress myself up into something comfortable for your mother. I'll be respectful. I'll be honest. But I won't shrink." Something passed across his face that she couldn't fully read. Relief, maybe. Or fear. Maybe both. I'm not asking you to, he said. Make sure your family knows that too, she said, before I walk in. He promised he would. She found out later that he hadn't, not fully, not in the ways that mattered. Carla drove her to the gate because Emily's car had a check engine light that had been burning since March, and some dignities small and particular were worth protecting. I can wait, Carla said, idling at the iron gate. 10 feet tall wrought iron opening on its own, like it was performing for her. I'll call you, Emily said. I'll have my phone on loud. Carla grabbed her wrist before she got out. Hey, look at me. Emily looked. You are the most capable person I have ever known in my life, Carla said, voice stripped of its usual humor, raw and direct. You kept your mother's house. You kept this job. You kept yourself together when most people would have fallen apart completely. You walk in there and you remember that, okay? You remember that no gate, and no crystal chandelier, and no woman in a $1,000 blazer changes what I just said. Emily's throat tightened. Stop, she said. You're going to make me cry, and I just fixed my mascara. I mean every word. I know. She squeezed Carla's hand. I know you do. She got out of the car. The gate was already open, waiting silent. She walked through it. The housekeeper who met her, Mrs. Vance, small and composed, with the particular stillness of someone who had witnessed 1,000 arrivals and learned to withhold judgment on all of them, led her through the entryway and down a hallway and into a sitting room that rearranged Emily's sense of scale. She had a second alone to look at the room before Margaret Sullivan spoke. She used it. 3 exits. 2 sofas angled so that whoever sat on them faced the door and the fireplace simultaneously. 1 chair positioned slightly apart, the power chair, the one you put guests in when you want them to feel like they're being watched from all sides. Fresh flowers, white formal. No family photos in this room. Intentional. You don't let strangers into your intimacy before you've decided what they're worth. And Margaret Sullivan, seated, white blazer, silver hair, posture, like architecture. Sitting. Not standing. Not rising to greet. Emily understood every word of it. So, Margaret said. You're the one. Emily Harper. She crossed the room and offered her hand before Margaret could make the choice not to. It's a pleasure. Margaret took it. Her grip was firm and brief and told Emily nothing she didn't already know. Sit down. Emily sat. In the guest chair. The watched from all sides chair. She sat straight and she folded her hands and she looked at Margaret Sullivan with the same open level attention she gave every customer who sat down at her counter. Full attention. No performance. Nothing hidden. Nothing apologized for. Margaret began. The questions came like a deposition, layered, deliberate, each one building on the last. Hometown, family, education, and the specific pause that followed when Emily said she hadn't finished her degree, a pause that lasted exactly 1/2 second longer than politeness allowed. Ryan mentioned your mother was ill, Margaret said. She was. She's better now. And your father. Passed when I was 12. I'm sorry. Said the way condolences are said when they're a formality. Heart. Car accident. A beat. That must have been very hard on your family. It was, Emily said simply. She didn't elaborate. She had learned young that over-explaining yourself to people who've already decided what you are is a gift they don't deserve. Margaret looked at her. Something in the assessment recalibrated invisibly by a degree too small to measure. So, Cassandra arrived like weather. She came through the side door without knocking her house, her rules, or maybe just her personality, and she looked at Emily the way you look at a rumor you've finally confirmed. Oh, she said. You're actually here. Cassandra, Margaret said. I'm just... Cassandra pressed her lips together, a smile underneath them. She was beautiful, and knew it with Ryan's dark eyes, and a cruelty around the edges of her mouth that was practiced enough to be architectural. She dropped onto the sofa with the casual authority of a woman who had never been told no in a room she owned. I thought maybe Ryan would come to his senses before Sunday. He does this. Gets attached to... She paused, selecting her word with the precision of someone choosing a blade. Projects. The word landed in the room like a stone in water. Emily looked at her. Steady. No flinch. A project, she repeated. I don't mean it harshly, Cassandra said in a tone that meant exactly that. Sure you do, Emily said. And that's fine, but I'd push back on the word choice. She kept her voice even, not cold, not heated, just clear like water you can see the bottom of. A project is something you pick up and put down. I've been at the same diner counter for 11 years. I finished my mother's mortgage. I show up when I say I will. She looked at Cassandra without blinking. I'm not a project. I'm a person, and I think you know the difference. Not a single sound in the room. Margaret's teacup halfway to her mouth didn't move. Cassandra's smile had gone perfectly dangerously still. And then Ryan walked in. Mrippink. He came in too fast, not running but close, and he looked at Emily first. Always Emily first, she'd noticed that it was the thing about him she trusted most. His eyes went to her like a compass needle finding north, checking, "Are you okay? Did they? I'm sorry, I should have been here." She gave him the smallest nod. His shoulders came down. "Mom." He kissed Margaret's cheek brief and practiced. "Cass." He came to stand beside Emily, beside, not in front of, not behind the specific geometry of she's with me, and his hand touched the back of her chair just lightly. "I see you've met." "We were getting acquainted," Margaret said, smooth as poured water. Emily was telling us about herself. Cassandra said something sharp buried in it. "Good." Ryan's voice was mild. His jaw was not. "She's worth knowing." Emily looked at him. He didn't know he'd just used her words. She'd said them to Cassandra 10 minutes ago. The people worth knowing are the ones who stay attached to what matters. He hadn't heard them. He'd arrived independently at the same language. She filed that away in a place she kept for things she didn't know what to do with yet. "Lunch is at 1, Cassandra said, standing done with the room now that it had stopped going her way. "Don't be late." She looked at Emily with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The family doesn't wait for guests." She walked out. Margaret excused herself with the grace of someone who exits rooms like she's doing them a favor. And then it was just Ryan and Emily and the fire, and the weight of the last 45 minutes settling around them. Ryan sat across from her, put his elbows on his knees, looked at her with something open and exhausted on his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "You said you'd tell them about me first." "I told them things." "Ryan." She leaned forward slightly. "You told them I worked at the diner and I was observant. That's not a person. That's a caption." He ran his hand through his hair, his tell the one she knew and didn't argue. "I know. I thought if they met you, their minds were made up before I arrived," she said. "The chair placement, your mother sitting down when I walked in, none of that is accidental." She paused. "You knew what this house does to people it hasn't approved of, and you sent me in without armor." "I didn't want to give them ammunition," he said. "If I built you up too much, they'd spend the whole lunch tearing it down." "That's not protection," she said quietly. "That's strategy. There's a difference." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry. I was scared." "Of what?" He looked at her. "Of them convincing you that I'm not worth this." The fire moved. Outside, wind shifted through whatever trees lined the estate's long drive. Emily looked at this man who had shown up at her counter on a Tuesday and ordered the wrong thing, and stayed for 8 months, and remembered the title of a book she'd mentioned in passing, and looked at her every morning like she was the realest thing in his day. "They can't convince me of anything I haven't already decided for myself," she said, "but I need you on the same side of the room as me, not theirs, not the middle, mine." "I am," he said. "Then prove it at lunch." There were 9 people at the Sullivan table, and Emily read every one of them inside the first 4 minutes. Dominic, the older brother. Ryan's face harder angles, a man who had absorbed the family expectations fully, and wore them like a suit that no longer fit, but had been tailored too expensively to discard. His wife Claire, who smiled too quickly and watched Dominic before she answered any question, the specific vigilance of a woman who had learned early which responses were safe. Gerald Hartwell, the family lawyer, seated not at the family end of the table, but not at the guest end, either, the ambiguous middle position of a man paid to be present, but never acknowledged. Two cousins, Brett and a girl whose name Emily caught, as Sloane, both young enough to be performing adulthood, rather than living in it. And then the food came, and the conversation wrapped itself around nothing. A property in coastal Maine, a charity event, a mutual acquaintance's recent engagement. The airtight small talk of people who have learned to discuss everything while revealing nothing. Emily ate. She listened. She asked one question about the Maine property, a real question, the kind that required actual knowledge to answer, and watched Dominic's eyebrows lift slightly when her follow-up was specific and informed. She said nothing else for 10 minutes, and then cousin Brett, kind eyes, nervous energy, the one who seemed least comfortable being there, turned to her in the particular way of someone desperate to make conversation, and said carefully, "Are you from this area originally?" "Millfield," Emily said. "About 40 minutes north." Right. He nodded. Our family had some dealings up there years ago. My father was involved in some land acquisition work through the company, Sullivan Holdings. He said the name without thinking, then helpfully walking directly into it. There was a family up there, Harper. I think they had farmland on the north end that... He stopped. He'd hurt himself. He turned and looked at Emily with the expression of a man who has just pulled a pin from a grenade and realized he's indoors. "Harper," he said. "That's your..." "Emily Harper," she said. Quiet. Still. "William Harper was my grandfather. 340 acres on the north end of Millfield." The color drained from Brett's face so completely it was almost clinical. "Emily, your family bought the first parcel in 1991, she said. Still quiet. Still even. The whole table was still. She could feel it, every ear turned without a head turning. "My grandfather held out for 2 years. They came back 4 times. The last time they didn't offer money. They offered pressure." She paused. "He sold in 1993. He died in 1996. Complete silence. She picked up her water glass. "The salmon is lovely, by the way," she said to no one in particular. No one moved, no one spoke. And at the head of the table, Margaret Sullivan sat with her hands folded and her expression unreadable, and she looked at Emily Harper, the girl from the diner, the waitress in the borrowed dress, the one they had laughed about before she arrived, and she did not look dismissive anymore. She looked like a woman who had just realized she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Gerald Hartwell was already watching Emily with new eyes. The lawyer's eyes. The ones that calculate exposure. Under the table, Ryan's hand found hers. She let him hold it. She did not squeeze back. Because something had shifted in the room, and she needed to be very still inside it, and she needed to think about what she knew, and what she didn't know yet, and what she was going to do with both. She turned to Dominic's wife Claire, and she smiled, and she said, "Tell me more about the Maine property. You said it was coastal. We used to drive up to the shore when I was little before." She let the before breathe for just a second. Before things changed. She watched the word before land on every face at the table. And she kept smiling, and she kept eating her salmon, and she let the silence do the work that no accusation could have done as cleanly. The most dangerous woman in the room, Emily Harper had learned long ago, was never the one who screamed. It was the one who knew exactly when to go quiet. The table cleared in stages the way tension always does, not all at once, but person by person, each departure a small exhale. Brett left first, excusing himself with a mumbled something about a phone call that nobody believed. Sloane followed minutes later. Claire touched Dominic's arm twice before he finally pushed back his chair and stood, and when he looked at Emily on his way out, it wasn't the dismissive glance he'd given her when she sat down. It was something more careful, more measuring. The look of a man revising a number he thought he already knew. Gerald Hartwell was the last to leave the table, and he took his time about it. He folded his napkin. He aligned his silverware. He took one final sip of water, and then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Emily with the flat professional attention of a man who has just identified a variable he didn't account for. "Miss Harper," he said. "It was a pleasure." "Mr. Hartwell," she said. He left without looking at Ryan. That told Emily more than anything else at the table had. Ryan waited until the room was empty. Then he turned to her, and his voice was low and tightly controlled, the voice of a man trying very hard not to show how undone he was. "Emily, the land my family's company, I need you to know I know you didn't know," she said. "I swear to you, I never." "Ryan." She turned to face him fully. "I believe you. That's not the conversation we need to have right now." He stopped. "Then what conversation do we need to have?" She looked at him steadily. "I need to know how much you know. Not what you did or didn't do, how much of the company's history you actually know. The acquisitions, the pressure campaigns, the families." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "Some," he said finally. "Not all of it." "Then that's where we start," she said. "Not with apologies, with truth." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man stepping onto uncertain ground and choosing to keep walking anyway. "Okay, but not here," she said, glancing toward the hallway where the last sounds of departure had faded. "Not in this house." She reached for her water glass. Finished it, set it down with the same composure she'd carried through the entire meal, and then she stood and straightened her borrowed dress, and she said almost to herself, "Your family thinks I came here today with nothing." Ryan looked at her. "You came here with everything," he said quietly. She didn't answer that. But something in her face shifted. Not softness exactly, but the particular expression of a person who has been seen accurately and doesn't quite know what to do with it yet. They found Margaret in the hallway. She was standing near the window at the end of the corridor, not looking out of it, just standing near it, the way people stand near things when they're thinking and need a direction to point their body. She turned when she heard them, and her expression had changed from the controlled precision of the lunch table into something Emily hadn't seen on her yet. She looked tired. "Emily," Margaret said, "could I have a moment?" It wasn't a question. Ryan's hand moved toward Emily's arm, and she stepped forward before he could decide whether to stop her. "Of course," she said. And the two women stood in the hallway, and Ryan stood very still behind Emily, like a man who understood this wasn't his moment to speak. Margaret looked at her for a long time before she started. "The Harper acquisition. I want you to understand the context." "Mrs. Sullivan," Emily said, and her voice was careful and measured and carried exactly no cruelty. "I've lived the context. I don't need it explained." A pause. "Your grandfather was a proud man." "Yes." "The company wasn't trying to—" Margaret stopped, restarted. "Business decisions and personal consequences are not always, they don't always map onto each other the way people expect." Emily finished for her. "I know. I've heard that argument before, from the bank, from the county office, from every institution that ever made a decision in a conference room that unraveled a family in a kitchen." She paused. "I'm not here to relitigate what happened 30 years ago. I'm here because your son asked me to be, and I came because I wanted to." Margaret's eyes held hers. "Why?" she asked, and the layer under the word was naked enough that Emily heard it clearly. "Why him? Why this family? Why would you walk into this house knowing what we took?" "Because he's worth it," Emily said simply. "Whatever your family did before he was old enough to have any say in it doesn't live in him. I've spent 8 months watching how he moves through the world. He tips the night staff first. He remembers names. He doesn't make people feel small to make himself feel large." She held Margaret's gaze. "He didn't learn that in a boardroom." Something crossed Margaret's face. Pride and pain so close together they were almost the same thing. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't." A beat of silence between them, not hostile, not warm, but honest. The first honest moment they'd had. Then Margaret said with the careful precision of a woman choosing her words like she was choosing weapons, "You're not what I expected." "I know," Emily said. "That's not necessarily a compliment." "I know that too." Margaret looked at her for another long moment, then shifted her gaze to Ryan, and something passed between mother and son. Compressed, layered years of unsaid things exchanged in a look, before she turned and walked back toward the main room, with the posture of a woman who had not lost a battle so much as discovered the battle was different than she'd thought. Ryan exhaled. "You okay?" he said. "Stop asking me that," Emily said, but without heat. "I'll tell you when I'm not." They were halfway down the drive, gravel sounding exactly the same, leaving as it had, arriving when Dominic called Ryan's name from behind them. He was coming from the side entrance alone without Claire, and he was moving with the specific purposeful gait of a man who has made a decision quickly and intends to execute it before he can reconsider. Ryan turned. "Dom." Dominic stopped a few feet away. He looked at Emily first. Not dismissively, not with the lingering evaluation of the lunch table. Just looked at her direct and brief, the way you look at a person you're reassessing. Then he looked at Ryan. "She knows about the Harper land." "Yes," Ryan said. "She knew before today." "She knew the company's name," Emily said. "Not the family name attached to it. Not until your cousin said it at the table." Dominic turned to her. "And you stayed through the whole meal." "I came here for lunch," Emily said. "I had lunch." He stared at her. And then, not a smile, not exactly, but the movement of a very controlled face, making the smallest concession, he said, "Ryan, she's either the most disciplined person you've ever brought to this house, or the most dangerous. Possibly both." "I know," Ryan said. "You should know," Dominic said, his voice dropping, his eyes moving back to Emily with a weight she felt through the borrowed dress and right down to the ground, "that Gerald Hartwell is going to make some calls tonight. About you. About the Harper land. About whatever claims might or might not exist." Silence. Emily felt the information land in her body before her mind caught it. The specific cold clarity of a new threat arriving. "Claims," she said. "If your grandfather signed under duress, if the process was not properly conducted." Dominic's jaw was tight. "Gerald's job is to protect this family's assets. That includes identifying exposure before it becomes a problem." "And I'm exposure now," Emily said. Dominic didn't answer, which was its own answer. Ryan took a step forward. "Dom, I'm not threatening her," Dominic said sharply. "I'm telling you, there is a difference, and I need you to understand it." He looked at Ryan with something complicated and urgent. "Handle this. However you need to handle it, before Gerald does." He turned and walked back toward the house. The gravel was very loud for a moment. Emily stood still. Ryan turned to her, and the look on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not the open, searching look from the diner counter, not the careful, deliberate look from the sitting room. Something raw. Something that had been stripped of its options. "Emily," he started. "I'm not filing a claim," she said immediately. "I know. I came here for you, not for the land, not for whatever a lawyer's going to spend tonight calculating." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that later. "But Ryan, I need you to understand this changes the shape of things. Your family isn't just evaluating whether I'm good enough for you anymore. Now they're evaluating whether I'm a liability." He looked at her for a long moment. "Does that change anything for you?" She thought about her grandfather, about the way he'd gotten quieter in his last years, the particular quiet of a man whose roots had been pulled. She thought about her mother, 19 years old, watching the farm sign over standing in the kitchen, understanding that the world didn't protect people like them unless they protected themselves. She thought about Ryan at her counter on a Tuesday morning, ordering the wrong thing and trusting her enough to let her correct him. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything." Something in him released so completely she could see it. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" He ran his hand through his hair. I need to make a call, tonight, before Gerald does anything. Call your brother first, she said. Not your lawyer? He looked at her. Why? Because Dominic just warned you. He didn't have to do that. He could have said nothing and let Gerald move without you knowing. She held his gaze. Your brother is not your enemy in this. Don't make him one by going over his head. Ryan stared at her. How do you do that? He said quietly. Not really a question. Do what? See the angle nobody else is looking at. Diner counter, she said. 8 years of reading what people actually need instead of what they're saying they want. She picked up her bag. Call Carla. Tell her I'm ready. He caught her hand. Emily. She turned. His face was open and undefended, and a little wrecked in the specific way of someone who has watched the person they care about walk through fire and come out not burned, but changed. Thank you, he said, for staying. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Don't thank me for staying, Ryan. Build something worth staying for. She let him hold her hand for 3 more seconds. Then she walked toward the gate. Carla was already there. She climbed in, closed the door, and sat in the silence of the car while Carla looked at her with the careful attention of a woman waiting for damage assessment. How bad, Carla said. Their lawyer is going to research my family name tonight, Emily said, to see if I have grounds for a claim on land Sullivan Holdings took from my grandfather in 1993. Carla was quiet for 4 full seconds. Emily, I know. Do you have grounds? Emily turned and looked at her best friend. The only person who had known her through every version of herself, the girl with the hole in her shoe, the daughter who held her mother's hand through hospital visits, the woman who had learned to read every room she walked into because she couldn't afford the alternative. I don't know yet, she said, but I think it's time I found out. Carla pulled out of the driveway, and the iron gate closed behind them, silent and enormous and final. Emily didn't look back at it. She was already thinking forward. Her grandmother had kept things. That was the one fact she'd always known, without fully registering her grandmother had kept everything. Letters, documents, the specific paperwork hoarding of a woman who had once been told by someone in a suit that she had no proof of anything and had spent the rest of her life making sure that was never true again. 3 boxes, labeled in her grandmother's careful hand, stored in the closet of the Millfield house that was now her mother's house. Emily had walked past those boxes 100 times. She had never opened them. Tonight, she thought. Tonight, she was going to open them. But first, she had one other stop to make. Can you drop me at Mom's on the way? She said. Carla glanced at her. Tonight? Tonight. Carla didn't ask why. That was what 11 years of friendship looked like, the questions you didn't need to ask because you already knew the answer was something the other person had to find out for themselves. She just drove. Emily's mother, Patricia Harper, was 58 years old and had the specific resilience of a woman who had been dealt bad hands her entire life and had learned to read the cards fast enough to stay in the game. She was small and precise and had her father's eyes. William Harper's eyes, watchful and steady, and a little sad in the way that eyes get when they've witnessed more than their share. She was in the kitchen when Emily walked in, and she took one look at her daughter's face and set down her dish towel. What happened? She said. Not a question. I had lunch with Ryan's family today, Emily said. I know. You told me. Patricia studied her. And? Emily sat down at the kitchen table. The same table she'd done homework at, cried at, eaten cereal at for the 12 years she'd lived in this house, and the same table she'd returned to in every crisis since. Mom, she said, I need to ask you about the land. Patricia went very still. Emily. Sullivan Holdings, Emily said. Ryan Sullivan. His family's company. The silence in the kitchen was a different kind than the silences at the estate. This one had texture, history, weight that had been accumulating for 30 years. Patricia sat down across from her daughter and put her hands flat on the table, and she said, "How long have you known?" "Since today," Emily said. "I didn't connect the name until someone said it at the table." Her mother's eyes closed for a moment. "Mom." Emily leaned forward. "Grandma kept boxes. In the closet. I've never opened them." "I know," Patricia said. "Do you know what's in them?" Patricia was quiet for a long time, long enough that Emily felt the answer before she heard it. "Yes," Patricia said finally. "I know exactly what's in them." Emily held very still. "And," she said. Her mother looked at her, the daughter she'd raised alone, the girl who'd grown up. Understanding that the world didn't offer safety nets to people like them, the woman who had walked into a Sullivan estate today wearing a borrowed dress and come back with a question 30 years in the making. "Your grandfather didn't just sell under pressure," Patricia said quietly. "He signed something he wasn't supposed to sign. A document they told him was a simple transfer deed." She paused. "It wasn't." Emily's hands were flat on the table. She was aware of them in the specific way you become aware of your body when everything else goes sharp. "What was it?" she said. Patricia looked at her. "A release," she said, "of all future claims. For any reason, for any amount." She paused. "Your grandfather couldn't read it without his glasses. He'd left them at home. The lawyer told him it was the same document they'd reviewed the week before." Patricia's voice didn't break. It was the voice of a woman who had already cried all the tears available to her for this particular story. It wasn't. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then, "Is that document in the box?" "The original," Patricia said. "And the letter your grandfather wrote afterward, when he realized, when he tried to—" She stopped. "He tried to fight it, Emily. He went back. He wrote letters. He found a lawyer in town who told him it would cost more than the land was worth to litigate, and he should let it go." "He couldn't let it go," Emily said. "No," her mother said. "He couldn't." Emily stood up. She crossed the kitchen to the hallway, and the closet door was exactly where it had always been, and the 3 boxes were exactly where they had always been labeled, in her grandmother's hand, "William. Farm. Legal." She put her hand on the box marked "Legal," and for the first time in 30 years, someone in the Harper family opened it. The box wasn't heavy. That was the thing that struck Emily first for something that had carried this much weight for 30 years. It weighed almost nothing in her hands. She carried it to the kitchen table and set it down between herself and her mother, and Patricia Harper. Looked at it the way people look at old wounds. They've learned to live around, not with fear exactly, but with the particular caution of someone who knows that some things once reopened don't close the same way twice. Emily lifted the lid. The documents were organized. Her grandmother had been a precise woman, every paper, in a manila folder. Every folder labeled in the same careful cursive. Emily recognized the handwriting from birthday cards, from grocery lists, stuck to the refrigerator, from the notes her grandmother used to tuck into her school lunch, until Emily was old enough to tell her she was embarrassed by them, a memory that landed now like a small, sharp stone. She pulled out the first folder. Legal correspondence, 1991 to 1993. The letters were typed on Sullivan Holdings letterhead. Formal professional, the language of men who understood that distance was protection. The first 3 were standard acquisition offers, increasing amounts, each one a little more pressure than the last, each one worded slightly differently, but saying the same fundamental thing: sell to us or find yourself in an increasingly difficult position. Her grandfather had written his responses by hand on lined notebook paper in the same stubborn cursive that ran through every generation of Harper women. The land is not for sale. It has been in this family for 60 years. No amount of money changes that. Emily read those words twice. He held out for 2 years, she said quietly. 2 years and 4 months, Patricia said. They came back 6 times. The offer went up every time. The last time they came, it wasn't just the money that changed. Emily looked up. Her mother's face was the particular still of someone recounting something they have gone over so many times, it no longer makes them cry, only tired. The last time, Patricia said, they came with a man from the county assessor's office, and they had paperwork showing that the property had been reassessed suddenly, conveniently, at a value that would trigger a tax liability your grandfather couldn't pay. She paused. Not a real liability, not a fair one, but real enough on paper to be a threat. Emily's hands had gone very still on the folder. "That's not an acquisition," she said. "That's a squeeze." "Yes," her mother said, "and a lawyer told him it would cost more to fight than the land was worth." The lawyer was new in town, Patricia said, and there was something in her voice, not accusation, just a fact placed carefully where it could be seen. He left Millfield 8 months later, got a position with a firm in the city. The kitchen was very quiet. Emily pulled out the second folder, the one labeled Final Transfer, August 1993. The document was 4 pages. Dense legal language, the kind specifically designed to require a specialist to decode. She found the paragraph Gerald Hartwell's counterparts had pointed to 30 years ago. The one her grandfather had been told was a standard transfer clause. It wasn't. It was a release of claims, all claims present and future against Sullivan Holdings, its subsidiaries, its successors, its officers, arising from or related to the acquisition of the property described herein in perpetuity. In perpetuity. Emily set the page down, picked it up, read it again. "He signed this without his glasses," she said. "He signed it because a man in a suit told him it was the same document they'd reviewed together the previous week," Patricia said. "And your grandfather was 64 years old and exhausted, and his wife was sitting in the car outside, and all he wanted was for it to be over." Emily thought about her grandfather, the man she remembered from childhood, before the last years when he got quiet. The way he used to walk the property with her naming things. "That oak has been here longer than anyone in this county can remember. That creek runs all the way to the Henderson place. This land knows us, Emily girl. It knows our feet." She pressed her lips together. "What's in the third folder?" she said. Patricia reached across and touched the folder but didn't open it. "Your grandfather's letter. Written 6 months after the sale. He was trying to build a case. He documented everything he could remember, the conversations, the men's names, the sequence of events." She paused. "He wrote 32 pages, Emily. By hand. 32 pages in a composition notebook." Emily opened the folder. The notebook was their black and white marbled cover, exactly the kind she'd used in school. She opened it to the first page. Her grandfather's handwriting, deliberate and slightly shaking the way hands shake when they're trying to be precise about something that makes them furious. "My name is William James Harper. I am writing this because I am afraid that if I don't, the truth of what happened will die when I do, and I am not willing for that to happen." Emily read the first paragraph and closed the notebook. Not because she couldn't bear it, because she needed to make one phone call before she read any further, and she needed to make it from a place that was clear-headed and cold and completely certain. She took out her phone. Ryan picked up on the second ring. "Emily? Are you alone?" she said. A pause. Movement on the other end. A door closing. "I am now." "I'm at my mother's," she said. "I've been looking at documents from 1993. Ryan, the release clause your family's lawyers put in the final transfer document was not what they told my grandfather it was. He signed something he didn't understand because they deliberately misrepresented it to him." Silence on the other end. The specific silence of someone processing information that is reorganizing something inside them. "Emily, I'm not calling you to threaten anything," she said. "I'm calling because I said we'd start with truth, and this is truth. Your family's company defrauded my grandfather. I have the original documents. I have his written account of events. And I have 30 years of a family that lost more than land." Ryan's voice when it came was rough in a way she hadn't heard from him. "How detailed is his account? Names, dates, specific conversations. 32 handwritten pages." Another silence. "I have to call Dominic," he said. I know. Emily, his voice dropped. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to hear me say it like I mean it. She thought about what it cost him to say that. Not the words were easy. The cost was in what came after. What he'd have to do, who he'd have to face, what it would mean for his family if any of this moved forward. I hear you, she said. What do you want to do? He said. Whatever you decide, I'm not going to fight it. I need you to know that. She looked at her mother across the table, and Patricia Harper was watching her daughter with an expression she couldn't fully name, pride and grief, and something that looked quietly like relief. Like a woman who had carried something for 30 years and was watching someone finally pick up the other end. I don't know yet, Emily said, but I'm going to finish reading. She hung up. Patricia made tea. Neither of them spoke while the kettle boiled. Emily opened the notebook again, and she read slowly and without rushing all 32 pages of William Harper's account, and by the time she reached the last page, the tea was cold, and her mother had moved her chair around to sit beside her, and was reading over her shoulder the way she used to read bedtime stories, and neither of them acknowledged the tears on Patricia's face because some moments are too sacred to name. The last thing her grandfather wrote was this: I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but if you do, if you're someone who found this and you have a Harper name, or you love someone with a Harper name, then you need to know that we did not give up this land. It was taken. And the difference between those two things matters. It has always mattered. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Emily closed the notebook. She sat with it in her hands for a long moment. Then her phone rang. Not Ryan. Dominic. She looked at the name on the screen for 2 full rings before she picked up. Mr. Sullivan, she said. Dominic, he said. You've earned that much. A pause. Ryan told me. Yes. I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Are you going to pursue this legally? Emily took a breath. I don't know yet. That's honest, he said. Can I be honest back? I'd prefer it. Another pause longer, the kind that has something complicated inside it. I've known about the Harper acquisition for 11 years, he said. I found it in an internal audit. The way it was handled, the reassessment, the document substitution, it was wrong. I flagged it internally. I was told it was old business and the statute of limitations had passed and to move on. Emily was very still. You knew, she said. I knew it was wrong, he said. I didn't know there was a written account. I didn't know the scope. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard at lunch. Discomfort, real discomfort, the kind that doesn't perform. If you have what Ryan says, you have the statute argument may not hold. Fraud has different timelines. I know, Emily said. Gerald is going to find that out too, Dominic said. Probably already has. He's been working since this afternoon. I figured. Emily. His voice shifted. Lower, more direct. The voice of a man talking to another person rather than a position. What my family's company did to yours was wrong. I'm not speaking for my mother, or for Gerald, or for the board. I'm speaking for myself. And if you decide to pursue this, I won't stand in your way. The kitchen was very still. Patricia was watching Emily's face the way you watch a bridge to see if it holds. Why are you telling me this? Emily said. Because Ryan loves you, Dominic said. Simply, flatly, like a fact. And because I am tired of carrying things that should have been put right a long time ago. A pause. And because you sat at my family's table today and got hit with all of it, and you didn't blow up the room. You just held it. That matters. Emily looked at her mother. Patricia reached over and covered Emily's hand with hers. I'll be in touch, Emily said. She put the phone down and sat in the quiet of her mother's kitchen and tried to locate herself inside the gravity of everything that had shifted in the last 8 hours. She had arrived at the Sullivan estate this morning as a waitress in a borrowed dress, unnamed and underestimated, and prepared for hostility. She was leaving, even if she was leaving from her mother's kitchen, not the estate driveway, as something else entirely. Something she didn't quite have the word for yet. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Patricia said, gently. Not a challenge, an acknowledgement. "No," Emily said. "Good," her mother said, and her voice was very quiet and very sure. "Your grandfather would have wanted someone to finish what he started." Emily nodded once. Then she picked up the notebook and held it with both hands, the way you hold something irreplaceable, and she said, "Mom, I need you to trust me with this." "I already do," Patricia said. "I always have." Emily slept at her mother's house that night on the narrow bed in her old room, and she didn't sleep much. She lay in the dark and thought about the shape of things, the way a single document could be both a wound and a weapon. The way trust and risk were not opposites, but the same thing from different angles. The way Ryan had said, "Whatever you decide," and meant it in a way she could feel through the phone line. She thought about Gerald Hartwell, who was somewhere tonight recalculating. She thought about Margaret Sullivan, who had looked uncertain in her own hallway. She thought about Dominic, who had carried a wrong thing for 11 years and was tired of the weight. And she thought about her grandfather's handwriting, deliberate, shaking, furious, precise, and the 32 pages he had written so that the truth would survive him. By 5 in the morning, she knew what she was going to do. She didn't call Ryan. She called Carla. "It's 5 a.m., Carla said without preamble. "I know. I need a lawyer." A pause. "What kind?" "The kind that's not afraid of a powerful family." Another pause. Longer. Then Carla said with the specific tone of a woman shifting from half asleep to completely focused, "My cousin Marcus. He does property law and civil litigation. He's been looking for a case like this his whole career." "Can you call him this morning?" "I'll call him right now," Carla said. "Emily." "Yeah. Are you okay?" Emily thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the reflexive, "I'm fine" that lived on the surface, but the real answer down in the part of her that her grandfather's handwriting had touched. "I'm something better than okay," she said. "I'm clear." She hung up and sat on the edge of her childhood bed in the early morning dark, and for the first time since she'd walked through that iron gate, she let herself feel the full weight of the day. The borrowed dress and the sitting room, and Cassandra's cruelty, and the salmon that nobody finished eating, and the box in her grandmother's closet that had been waiting patient and precise for someone brave enough to open it. Then she stood up. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She got out the composition notebook and a legal pad, and she began to write down in her own clear, careful hand everything she remembered, and everything she knew, and everything she intended to do next. The kettle boiled. Outside Millfield was beginning to wake up the particular early sounds of a small town returning to itself, the sounds she had grown up with and never fully left and never fully needed to leave, because the place you come from isn't a thing you escape, it's a thing you carry, and the question was never how far you could get from it, but what you did with it once you understood what it had made you. Emily Harper knew exactly what it had made her. Her phone lit up on the table. Ryan. She looked at the message. "I couldn't sleep either. I'm sorry for everything my family did. I'm not sorry for anything that brought me to your counter on that Tuesday. Tell me what you need." She picked up the phone and typed back, "Come to Millfield. Bring coffee. Leave Gerald Hartwell at home." 3 dots appeared. Then, "On my way." She put the phone face down on the table and looked at her grandfather's notebook, and she thought, "I'm going to finish this for you. Not with anger, not with revenge. With the same thing you used to write 32 pages in a composition notebook when you were 64 years old and exhausted and afraid no one would ever read it. Truth. Just the plain, documented, unignorable truth. And in Emily Harper's experience, the truth delivered clearly without apology by a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to say was the most powerful thing in any room it walked into. Ryan arrived at 7:43 in the morning with 2 coffees and the look of a man who had driven 40 minutes in the dark, arguing with himself the whole way. Emily heard his car on the gravel before she saw it, and she was already at the door when he came up the front path, and the first thing he did before he said a word, before he handed her the coffee was look at her face. The way you look at something you are genuinely afraid might not still be there. She took the coffee. "Come in," she said. Patricia was already at work the early shift at the school district that had been her anchor for 20 years. The house was quiet. Emily had the legal pad on the table, her grandfather's notebook beside it, the 3 folders arranged in the order she intended to use them. Ryan sat down across from her and looked at everything on the table and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You've been up all night." "Most of it," she said. "Emily." "Ryan?" She cut him off gently but completely. "I need you to look at something before we talk about anything else." She slid the folder across, the one with the final transfer document. She watched his face as he read the paragraph she'd marked the release clause. The language her grandfather had been told was standard, the words in perpetuity sitting at the bottom like a door that had been locked from the outside. He read it twice. She knew because she watched his eyes track back to the beginning. When he looked up, something in his face had gone very still. "They told him this was a transfer deed," she said. "Yes." "He didn't have his glasses." Ryan closed the folder, set it down, put both hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized. It was the same thing she did when she needed to feel something solid under her. "My father ran Sullivan Holdings until 2004, he said. "He died when I was 22. I inherited a seat on the board. I did not inherit the details of every acquisition his company made in the 90s. His voice was controlled and precise, and underneath it something was burning. "I need you to know that." "I know that," she said. "But knowing it doesn't make it better. It just makes it mine to deal with now." He looked at her directly. "What do you need from me?" She picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down. "I need to know if Sullivan Holdings still owns the land." He didn't answer immediately, which meant the answer was complicated. "Part of it," he said finally. "The northern parcel, about 180 acres, was sold to a development company in 2008. The southern parcel, 160 acres, is still held by a Sullivan Holdings subsidiary." Emily absorbed that. "So 160 acres of my grandfather's land," she said, "is still in your family's possession?" "Yes." The word sat between them on the table like something that needed to be handled carefully. "Marcus Reyes called me this morning," Emily said. "Carla's cousin. He's a property and civil litigation attorney. He wants to meet today." Ryan nodded slowly. "Okay." "I'm not going to ask your permission," she said. Not unkindly, clearly. "I know," he said. "I'm not offering it. I'm just saying okay. Whatever this becomes, I'm not going to be on the other side of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Dominic called me last night." Ryan's expression shifted. "I know. He told me. He said he'd flagged it 11 years ago and was told to let it go." "Yes." A muscle in Ryan's jaw moved. "He also told me that this morning for the first time in detail. We were on the phone for an hour." He paused. "Dominic and I we don't always agree on how the family operates. He stayed inside it, accepted the terms. I've spent 10 years trying to reform things from within, and sometimes I don't know if that makes me principled or just comfortable." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 8 months. She felt it land. "What did you say to each other?" she said. "He said he should have pushed harder in 2013. I said I should have asked harder questions before 2013. Ryan looked at his hands. "Then we agreed that we were both saying things 11 years too late, and that the question now was what we were going to do, not what we should have done." "And what are you going to do?" she said. He looked up. "Whatever you need. But Emily, I want to be clear about something. I'm not doing this because of the legal exposure. I'm not doing this because Dominic thinks it's the right strategy. I'm doing this because your grandfather wrote 32 pages in a composition notebook so that someone would know the truth, and the least I can do is make sure that someone acts on it." The kitchen was very quiet. Emily picked up the notebook and held it for a moment. Then she slid it across the table to him. "Read the last page," she said. He opened it to the back. She watched him read. She watched the exact moment he reached the last paragraph. The difference between those two things matters. It has always mattered. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because his jaw tightened and he closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds before he looked back up. "Okay," he said. His voice was rough. "Let's go meet Marcus Reyes." Marcus Reyes was 39 years old, had the compact, focused energy of a man who chose his cases the way other people chose causes. And when Emily walked into his office at 9 that morning with Ryan Sullivan beside her and a box of her grandfather's documents under her arm, he looked at the box first, then at Ryan, and he said, "You brought the defendant." "I'm not a defendant," Ryan said. "Not yet," Marcus said pleasantly. "Sit down." He was good. Emily recognized it within the first 10 minutes. He asked questions with the precision of someone who already understood the architecture of what she was describing and was filling in the load-bearing details. He read the transfer document without expression. He read the release clause and then read it again and then set it down and said almost to himself, they knew exactly what they were doing. "Yes," Emily said. "The fraud clock in this state doesn't start running until the injured party discovers the fraud," Marcus said, looking at her. "Not when it happened, when they knew." He paused. "When did you find out?" "Yesterday." He looked at Ryan. "Does Sullivan Holdings have legal counsel currently representing them in relation to this matter?" "Gerald Hartwell has been the family's attorney for 20 years, Ryan said. "He became aware of the situation yesterday, so they have approximately a 12-hour head start," Marcus said. He didn't seem particularly bothered by this. "That's fine. We have something better than a head start." "What?" Emily said. Marcus tapped the composition notebook. "We have his voice. 32 pages of contemporaneous documentation from the injured party himself, written 6 months after the fraud occurred, naming names, describing conversations, identifying the specific misrepresentation." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" Most of these cases live or die on reconstruction, people trying to remember 30 years later what happened. You have a primary source. He looked at Emily. "Your grandfather was a precise man." "He was," she said. "He was also angry." "He had earned that." Marcus almost smiled. "Yes, he had." He closed the folder. "Here's where we are. You have grounds for a fraud claim that is not time-barred under discovery rule. You have documentary evidence. You have a contemporaneous written account. You potentially have a family member of the acquiring company who is willing to corroborate internal knowledge of misconduct." He looked at Ryan. "Are you willing to be deposed?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Marcus looked at him for a moment with the calibrating attention of a man deciding whether to believe what he's seeing. Then he nodded once. "Okay, here's what I need from you both." Emily's phone buzzed on the table. Gerald Hartwell. She looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the phone. Marcus looked at both of them. "Don't answer it," Marcus said. "I know," Emily said. She turned the phone face down. It buzzed twice more, stopped. Then a text arrived, which she didn't read yet, and then another call, which she didn't take, and then the room was quiet again, and Marcus walked them through the next 2 hours of paperwork and strategy, and the specific architecture of what a fraud and wrongful acquisition claim looked like when it was built correctly. By noon, Emily had retained Marcus Reyes. By 12:15, Gerald Hartwell's calls had been forwarded to Marcus's office. By 12:30, Ryan had called Dominic, and Dominic had said 3 words. "I'll be there." Emily was standing outside Marcus's office building her grandfather's box under her arm. Ryan beside her when she finally looked at Gerald Hartwell's texts. The first one, Miss Harper. "I believe we should speak directly before this situation escalates unnecessarily. The second, Sullivan Holdings is prepared to discuss a private settlement. No litigation necessary. Please call me." The third, which had arrived during the meeting. "The release clause your grandfather signed is legally binding. Any action you take will be expensive and protracted and ultimately unsuccessful. I strongly advise you to consider your options carefully." She read all 3. Then she handed the phone to Ryan without a word. He read them. The color in his face changed in a specific way she was learning to recognize. Not anger that went outward, but the kind that went inward, hot, and controlled, the kind that made decisions rather than scenes. He handed the phone back. "He's trying to scare you," Ryan said. "I know," Emily said. "He's also telling me exactly how worried he is." Ryan looked at her. If they were certain the release clause would hold, she said, he wouldn't be offering a settlement in the second text. He'd be citing the clause and ending the conversation. She looked at the phone. "He doesn't know what we have, and it's making him move too fast." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're terrifying. You know that." "I've been told. I'm observant," she said. She put the phone in her pocket, and they walked to their cars, and Emily drove back to Millfield to tell her mother what had happened. And the drive took 40 minutes, and she spent most of it thinking not about the legal strategy or Gerald Hartwell's texts, but about her grandfather walking his land with a small girl naming things, and the particular way he'd said "this land knows us" like it was a fact as certain as weather. Patricia cried when Emily told her. Not the worn-out, accommodated grief of the night before, but something fresher and more complicated, the specific tears of someone who has spent decades believing that a wrong thing was permanent and is confronted suddenly with the possibility that it isn't. "Marcus thinks we have a case," Emily said. "Does Ryan?" "Ryan is going to be deposed," Emily said. "His brother too." Patricia pressed her hand to her mouth. Then she lowered it and said very quietly, "Your grandfather would not believe this." "He wrote 32 pages so it would be believed," Emily said. "I think some part of him always expected someone to find it." That evening, Emily was back at Maplewood for the closing shift, because that was her life, and she didn't intend to behave as if it wasn't, and Carla watched her wipe down the counter with the expression of someone trying to reconcile multiple versions of the same person. "You retained Marcus," Carla said. "You're potentially suing the Sullivan family. And you're here wiping down the counter." "The counter needs wiping," Emily said. "Emily." "Carla." She stopped and looked at her friend. "This is my life. A lawsuit doesn't change that. Whatever happens with the land and the documents and the legal process, this is still where I work. These are still my people. Old Mr. Briggs is going to come in tomorrow and want his coffee before he asks, and I'm going to have it ready, and that matters. It doesn't matter less, because some other things matter too." Carla looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and squeezed Emily's shoulder, once firm and brief, the way you touch someone who is carrying something heavy and doing it well. The bell above the door rang. Emily looked up. Margaret Sullivan walked into Maplewood Diner, alone. No Mrs. Vance, no driver waiting outside, no armor of context or family. Just Margaret Sullivan, in a coat that probably cost more than Emily's car, standing in the doorway of a laminate counter diner in Millfield, looking at Emily across a room that could not have been further from her own world. The 3 other customers in the diner didn't look up. Carla went very still behind the counter. Margaret walked to the counter and sat down on a stool, the second stool from the left. Emily's stool, the one directly in front of where Emily stood. Emily set down the cloth she was holding. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said. "I've never been in a place like this," Margaret said. Not dismissively, observationally, the way a person speaks when they're being honest about their own limitations. "What can I get you?" Emily said. Margaret looked at the menu on the board behind Emily's head, looked at it for a real moment, not a performed one. "Coffee," she said. "Black." "Please." Emily poured it, set it in front of her. Margaret wrapped both hands around the mug exactly the way Ryan always did, and Emily filed that away without comment. "Ryan doesn't know I'm here," Margaret said. "I figured. I came because—" Margaret stopped, looked at the coffee. "I came because I read your grandfather's file, our file, the acquisition documents." She paused. "Gerald keeps copies of everything, has since the beginning. He gave them to me this afternoon." Another pause. "He thought they would reassure me." "Did they?" Emily said. "No," Margaret said. "They did the opposite." Emily leaned one hand on the counter. Waited. What was done to your grandfather's family was wrong, Margaret said. The words came out precise and effortful, like they'd been rehearsed, but were still hard to say. I did not know the specific details. I want you to know that. What did you know? Emily said. Margaret looked up. Her eyes were steady and a little pained and completely direct, the first completely unguarded thing Emily had seen from her. I knew the company was aggressive. I knew Robert, my husband. I knew he believed that business was a different moral universe from personal life. I told myself that was his world and not mine. She paused. That was a coward's position. I've known that for a long time. The diner was very quiet. Carla had moved to the far end of the counter and was pretending to organize things. Why are you telling me this? Emily said. Because you are going to be in my family's life, Margaret said. Whether I accept that gracefully or not, it is true. Ryan has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you, ever. In 34 years of watching my son move through the world. She picked up the coffee mug, set it down without drinking. And I am not willing to be an obstacle to something my son needs because I am too proud to admit that I misjudged the situation. Emily looked at her. You didn't just misjudge the situation, Emily said. You came to that table ready to dismiss me before I opened my mouth. Yes, Margaret said, simply. I did. And now, Margaret met her eyes. Now I'm sitting at your counter asking for your coffee and trying with considerable difficulty to say that I was wrong. The clock above the coffee station ticked once. Emily straightened, picked up the coffee pot, topped off Margaret's mug without being asked. Gerald called me, Emily said, 3 times. He suggested the release clause was airtight and any legal action would be expensive and unsuccessful. Margaret's jaw tightened visibly. I know. He told me he'd reached out. I've retained an attorney, Emily said. We're moving forward. I know that too. Margaret looked at her steadily. I'm not here to stop you. I'm not here to negotiate on Gerald's behalf. I came to say... She paused, and the pause had real weight in it. That if Sullivan Holdings is found to have committed fraud against your grandfather, I will not obstruct a remedy. Whatever that remedy looks like. Emily was quiet for a moment. Does Gerald know you're saying that? No. Does Ryan? No. Dominic? Something crossed Margaret's face. Dominic has known this was wrong for 11 years. He told me so tonight for the first time. She looked down at the counter. I have 2 sons. One of them buried a wrong thing for a decade because I built a family culture where admitting error felt like weakness. The other one, she stopped. The other one drove to Millfield at dawn with 2 coffees. Emily looked at this woman who had sat down when she walked in, who had let Cassandra deploy her cruelty, who had built a family culture on the assumption that people like Emily Harper were temporary inconveniences, and she saw something she hadn't expected to see. Not a villain, not a caricature. A person trying very late and very imperfectly to be better than the version of herself she'd been maintaining for 40 years. It didn't erase anything. It didn't undo the sitting room or the lunch table or the 3 decades of a family unraveled by a document her grandfather signed without his glasses. But it was real. And Emily Harper, who had spent her entire life insisting on the reality of things, even when it was uncomfortable, wasn't going to dismiss it. Finish your coffee, she said. And then go home and tell Gerald Hartwell that the Sullivan family will not be contesting the claim. Margaret looked at her. Just like that, she said. Not just like that, Emily said quietly. 30 years like that, but yes. Margaret picked up the coffee mug with both hands. Her son's gesture, his and hers. Something passed down without anyone choosing it, and she drank, and the diner was warm and smelled like coffee, and something frying in the kitchen. And outside Millfield was doing what small towns do at night, going quiet and steady and completely itself. And Emily Harper stood behind her counter in her place in her world, and she waited for whatever came next. Margaret Sullivan left Maplewood at 8:47, and Emily knew the exact time because she looked at the clock when the bell above the door rang on her way out, the same bell that rang for every customer indifferent to the weight of what had just happened. Carla waited exactly 4 seconds. "Okay," she said from the far end of the counter. "I need you to explain to me what I just witnessed." "Margaret Sullivan had coffee," Emily said. "Emily. Black, no sugar. Emily Harper. I watched that woman sit at this counter and say things I have never in my life heard a person like her say to a person like you, and you topped off her mug and told her to go home and drop the legal fight. And I need you to explain to me how you are standing there, looking like you just finished a regular Tuesday shift." Emily picked up the cloth she'd set down 30 minutes ago and went back to wiping the counter. "Because I am finishing a regular Tuesday shift." Carla walked the length of the counter and put both hands on it and looked at her friend with the specific intensity of someone who has 11 years of investment in this particular person's well-being and is experiencing something complicated. "Are you okay? Like actually really down in the center of you? Okay?" Emily stopped wiping. She thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned to do, not the surface answer, not the managed answer, but the real one. "I think so," she said. "I think I'm something I haven't been in a long time." "What's that?" "Done waiting," Emily said. "Done waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Done waiting for the right moment. Done waiting for permission to take up space." She looked at Carla. "My grandfather waited. He wrote 32 pages and then he waited for someone to find them and do something. I found them. I'm doing something. And it doesn't feel like anger anymore. It just feels like clarity." Carla looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached across the counter and gripped Emily's hand once hard and let go. "Okay," she said. "Good." Emily's phone rang at 9:15. Ryan. "My mother just walked in the front door," he said without preamble. "She told me she went to see you." "Yes." "She told me what she said." A pause. "She also told me she called Gerald on the drive home and told him Sullivan Holdings would not be contesting the claim." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "She did it tonight. 20 minutes ago." His voice had something in it she'd never heard before, not quite disbelief, but the adjacent feeling, the one you get when someone you've known your whole life does something that reframes the whole picture. He told her it was a significant legal and financial risk. She told him she was aware of that, and to proceed accordingly. Emily sat down on the stool nearest the counter, her stool the one she stood in front of every morning, the one Ryan had never once sat on because he always took the second from the left. She sat on it now and pressed her free hand flat on the laminate surface and felt the familiar reality of it under her palm. "Ryan," she said. "I know," he said. "How much is this going to cost your family?" "I don't know yet. Marcus will need to establish current land value, back value, consequential damages." A pause. "It's going to be significant." "Are you?" "Emily." His voice was very quiet and very certain. "Stop. Don't ask me if I'm sure. Don't ask me if it's worth it. I am, and it is. The only thing I want to ask you right now is whether you'll let me come back to Millfield tomorrow." She looked around the diner, the laminate counter, the wobbly leg on table 9, the particular quality of the light from the fixture above the coffee station that she had looked at so many thousands of times, it had become part of how she understood the world. "Come for the morning shift," she said. 5:30. I'll show you how to make coffee that doesn't taste like hot disappointment." He laughed. The real laugh, the unguarded one. "I'll be there." She hung up and sat on her stool for another minute before she got up and finished her shift. And when she locked up at 10 and stood outside in the Millfield night, she looked up at the sky the way her grandfather used to, and she said nothing, because some things don't need words. They just need to be felt fully and then carried forward. Gerald Hartwell called Marcus Reyes the following morning at 8 a.m., and the conversation lasted 47 minutes, and Marcus called Emily immediately after to tell her that Sullivan Holdings had formally agreed to enter mediation and had withdrawn any reliance on the release clause. "They're not fighting it," Emily said. "They're not fighting it," Marcus said. "Their position is that the clause was improperly obtained, and they are prepared to acknowledge that in mediation." Emily sat with that for a moment. "What changed?" "Two things," Marcus said. 1. Your grandfather's account is detailed enough and credible enough that contesting it in open court would be a disaster for their reputation. These things don't stay quiet. 2. He paused. Apparently, the senior surviving member of the family gave instruction yesterday evening to stand down. Margaret, Emily said. I don't have names, Marcus said pleasantly. I just have outcomes. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and in those 3 weeks, Emily's life moved in 2 directions simultaneously: forward, into something new, and back through something old, and both of them demanded her full attention. The documents her grandfather had written went to a forensic document specialist Marcus hired, who confirmed their age, their consistency, and their authenticity with the kind of clinical certainty that made Gerald Hartwell's team go very quiet in a way that Marcus described as professionally educational. Dominic Sullivan requested a meeting with Emily, not at the estate, at a coffee shop in the city neutral ground, and he arrived before her and was already standing when she walked in, which she noticed and which was different from every other Sullivan who had ever received her in a room. I owe you an apology that's 11 years overdue, he said before she sat down. Sit down, Dominic, she said. Let's talk. They talked for 2 hours. He told her things about Sullivan Holdings' acquisition practices in the 90s that made her stomach tighten. Not just her grandfather's land, but others. A pattern of pressure and document manipulation that had been company policy under his father's leadership. He had documented some of it. He had kept his own files. Why? She said. Why did you keep them? He looked at his coffee. Because I thought someday I'd be brave enough to do something with them. He paused. Turns out it took someone else being brave first. Emily looked at him. Are you willing to cooperate fully in mediation? Yes, he said. And beyond that if necessary. There may be other families, she said. Other Harpers. He nodded slowly. The weight of that sat on him visibly. I know. That's going to be a longer conversation. It is, she said, but it starts with this one. She reached across and picked up her coffee and held it the way the Sullivans held Mug's both hands, which she realized now she'd absorbed from Ryan without knowing. And she thought about what it meant that small gestures cross lines you didn't know you were crossing. And she found something almost like tenderness in it. Ryan came to Maplewood every morning for 2 weeks. Not as a gesture, not as a performance of commitment. He came because she'd told him to, and because, as he discovered on the 3rd morning, he was actually useful. He was terrible at the coffee machine initially, and slightly better by day 5, and competent enough by day 10 that Carla stopped supervising him with the expression of someone watching a toddler near open water. He learns fast, Carla told Emily with grudging approval. He does, Emily agreed. He also tips significantly better than normal people. I know. I've told him to stop. Please don't, Carla said. Old Mr. Briggs came in on the 2nd Thursday and found Ryan Sullivan behind the counter pouring his coffee, and looked from the coffee to Ryan to Emily with the slow, deliberate attention of a man who has been watching this town for 70 years and intends to have an opinion about everything in it. You're new, Mr. Briggs said to Ryan. Yes, sir. You're not from here. No, sir, but I'm trying to learn. Mr. Briggs looked at him for another long moment. Then he said, Emily keeps the sugar on the left side of the station, not the right. Ryan looked. The sugar was on the right. He moved it. Better, Mr. Briggs said, and picked up his coffee. Emily, watching from 3 feet away, felt something happen in her chest that she didn't try to name. The mediation happened on a Wednesday in a conference room in a building in the city, with a mediator named Sandra Chu, who had the contained, clear-eyed attention of someone who had seen every version of every argument and was interested only in what was true. Emily came with Marcus. Ryan came with Dominic. Gerald Hartwell came representing Sullivan Holdings, and he looked for the first time since Emily had identified him at the lunch table like a man who understood he was on the losing side of something and had made his peace with it. Margaret Sullivan was not present. She had sent a written statement which Sandra Chu read into the record at the beginning of the session. It said, Sullivan Holdings acknowledges that the acquisition of the Harper property in August of 1993 was conducted in a manner that did not meet appropriate legal or ethical standards. The release clause obtained in that transaction was not properly represented to the signatory, and Sullivan Holdings withdraws reliance on it in its entirety. We are prepared to make this right. The room was quiet when Sandra finished reading it. Emily looked at the table. She thought about her grandfather, 64 years old and exhausted, sitting across from a man in a suit who told him it was the same document they'd reviewed together, and how he'd believed him, because you trust people in suits when you're tired, and your wife is waiting in the car, and all you want is for it to be over. She thought about 32 pages in a composition notebook. About the word taken, underlined, twice. Miss Harper, Sandra Chu said, would you like to respond to the statement? Emily looked up. Yes, she said. She had not prepared remarks. She had not written anything down. She had sat across from Sandra Chu and Ryan and Dominic and Gerald Hartwell, and she spoke the way she always spoke, directly, without decoration, with the specific clarity of someone who had been finding the right words in her own head for 3 weeks, and was ready now to say them out loud. My grandfather was a precise man, she said. He kept records. He paid attention. He built something over 60 years on land that had been in his family since before most institutions in this state existed. When that land was taken from him, and I'm using his word, taken, not sold, not transferred, taken, it didn't just cost him acreage. It cost him his sense of the world as a place where honest people are protected. She paused. He spent the last 3 years of his life writing down what happened so that the truth would survive him. He didn't write it out of bitterness. He wrote it because he believed that the truth documented and preserved had a power that outlasted the people who tried to bury it. She looked around the table. He was right. No one spoke. What I'm asking for today is not punishment, she continued. I'm not asking anyone in this room to suffer. I'm asking for the southern parcel, the 160 acres still held by Sullivan Holdings, to be returned to the Harper family. And I'm asking for a formal documented acknowledgement that the 1993 acquisition was conducted fraudulently, so that my grandfather's account is validated by the record, rather than just preserved in a box. Gerald Hartwell's pen had not moved in 4 minutes. Ryan was looking at her with the same expression she'd seen at the diner counter on Tuesday mornings, open and certain and a little undone. Dominic had his hands flat on the table. Sandra Chu said, Mr. Hartwell, does Sullivan Holdings wish to respond? Gerald looked at his documents. Then he looked at Emily. And for the first time since she'd identified him at the lunch table, he looked at her not as an adversary or a variable or a liability, but as a person. Sullivan Holdings agrees to the return of the southern parcel, he said, and agrees to the formal acknowledgement as stated. The room exhaled. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just exhaled, the specific release of something that has been held too tight for too long. Marcus put his pen down. Dominic closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Ryan's hand moved toward Emily's side of the table and stopped, because this was a conference room and not a kitchen table, and he understood the line. Emily looked at the acknowledgement document when Sandra slid it across. She read it fully, every word, the way her grandfather would have, if he'd had his glasses. Then she signed it with the same careful cursive that ran through every generation of Harper women, the handwriting she'd gotten from her grandmother without knowing she was inheriting it. The handwriting that had labeled 3 boxes in a closet and waited 30 years for someone to open them. She put the pen down. Thank you, she said to the room. Not gratitude, acknowledgement. The recognition that something true had finally been made official. Outside afterward, Ryan caught up with her on the steps, and they stood side by side in the particular way of 2 people who have been through something together and are still finding their footing on the other side of it. Are you okay? He said. Then caught himself. Sorry. You told me to stop asking that. I'll tell you when I'm not, she said. Then after a moment, I'm good, Ryan. I'm really good. He looked at her. What do you want to do now? She thought about it. About the land 160 acres in millfield grass and creek and oak, and the particular shape of a family's history written into the ground. About her grandfather walking it with her and naming things. About her mother's face when she'd called her from the parking lot 20 minutes ago and said 2 words, "We won." Patricia had made a sound Emily had never heard from her before. Not crying. Something older and more complicated than crying. The sound of a person setting down something they've been carrying for 30 years. "I want to go home," Emily said. "I want to go to Millfield, and I want to walk that land, and I want to take my mother, and I want to stand where my grandfather stood, and just—" She paused. Just be there. Without any legal documents or family dynamics or borrowed dresses. "Can I come?" Ryan said. She looked at him. This man who had driven 40 minutes in the dark with 2 coffees. Who had said whatever you decide and meant it. Who had moved the sugar to the left side of the station because an old man told him to without asking why. "Yes," she said, "but you're carrying the coffee." He laughed. And she walked down the steps beside him, and the city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent and alive. And Emily Harper felt the particular lightness of someone who has stopped waiting and started living. Not the version of living that requires permission or validation or the right dress or the right name, but the real kind, the one that belongs entirely to the person doing it. They drove to Millfield in separate cars and arrived at the same time. And Patricia was already at the edge of the property when they pulled up, standing at the old fence line where the Harper land began, her hand on the top post, looking out at 160 acres that had been someone else's for 30 years and was about to be hers again. Emily got out of the car and walked to her mother and stood beside her and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying. Patricia turned and looked at her daughter. Really looked the way mothers look at their children when they're seeing not just the person in front of them, but every version of that person they've ever loved. The girl at the kitchen table and the young woman holding hospital doors, and the adult who had walked into a room full of people who dismissed her and come out holding the truth like a compass. "He would have been so proud of you," Patricia said. Emily nodded. Her throat was tight. She looked out at the land, the grass moving in whatever small wind was moving through Millfield that afternoon. The creek she could hear before she could see the oak her grandfather had told her was older than anyone in the county could remember. Ryan came to stand a few feet to her right, not crowding the moment, just present. Solid. There. And Emily Harper stood at the edge of her grandfather's land. Her land now, her family's again. And she breathed it in, and she felt the weight of everything behind her, and the openness of everything ahead, and she understood, finally and completely, what her grandfather had meant when he'd said this, "Land knows us." It wasn't sentiment. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a fact. The same fact he'd written down in 32 pages and sealed in a composition notebook and left for someone brave enough to open it. Some things belong to you, not because you hold a deed to them, but because they are written in the way you move through the world, in the calluses on your hands, and the words you reach for when the room goes quiet, and the particular way you hold a coffee mug, like the warmth is something you actually needed, and not just expected. Emily Harper had walked into a room full of people who laughed at where she came from, and she had held her ground, and she had found the truth, and she had brought it home. And standing at the fence line of the land, her grandfather loved her mother beside her, and Ryan Sullivan behind her, and the whole of Millfield stretching out ahead. She knew with the same clarity she'd felt at 5 in the morning, writing on a legal pad, with the same certainty her grandfather had felt writing 32 pages in the dark, that this was not an ending. This was what it looked like when the right person finally stopped waiting and took back what was always theirs.